Welcome back to Come and Brew It Radio, coming to you from Texas Brewing Inc. in Halton City, Texas. You can find us on the web at txbrewing.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and share with your friends.
In this episode, you may have noticed that Pete is back.
What's up?
And we're going to continue our discussions on Belgian beers by talking about Belgian dark strongs, and also get into some talk about high-gravity brewing and fermentation.
They go well together.
They do.
Holla.
But before we get started, please be sure to check out our Patreon account to help support the show. Every little bit counts, and if you visit patreon.com/comeandbrewiradio, we have a wide variety of options for you to help keep the show going, get involved, and improve it. Plus,
And
we'd like
get
to
you laid.
Yeah, we guarantee that every supporter at some point in their life will get laid.
Get laid.
Yeah. Plus, we'd like to thank Matt Engelman
That would
for
suck
being our new
otherwise.
Patreon supporter. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks,
Thanks,
man.
You are
Matt.
the man.
All right. I'm Pete.
I'm Chris.
I'm Brandon.
I'm Greg.
I'm Sean.
Yeah, and speaking of our special guest tonight, Sean, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Sean Kidwell with Cowtown Brewing Company.
All right,
Thanks
man.
for coming in, Sean.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
I would have remembered to introduce you in the introduction there, but I had a blank paper to work with here.
Yeah.
And Pete was barking into the microphone and
You know-
squealing, so it's very distracting.
The opposite side of the page that has writing on it is always blank. B. Randon.
So was
I'm
the
just saying.
empty-
So is the part
episode
where the
intro
intro
that I
was
didn't
supposed
fill
to
out.
be. Yeah.
Yes, that wasn't
It's
filled out.
it's
this week.
okay. We'll still drink beer with you.
That's right.
You
Like
did
we have a
good,
choice.
Brandon. Pat on back.
You get a trophy.
So,
like all the other kids.
so for a while there, I was pretty happy that Pete was back, and then he just ruined it right now. No, we are very glad to have Pete back in the studio with us.
What's up?
And we've got some good stuff to talk about tonight. First off, before we get into the show, normally where we talk about recent happenings here, a lot of you probably recently received the survey from the American Homebrewers Association that was, I don't know, probably took about 10, 15 minutes to do,
Right.
a bunch of different questions. And there's an article out with the results of that, and I kind of thought we'd touch on a couple of things I thought were interesting in there. We don't need to go through every last little thing because there's a lot of them, but there was a few things that stood out to me. So we'll get into that a little bit here, and then we have Sean Kidwell here from a new up-and-coming brewery here in Fort Worth called Cowtown Brewing.
Cowtown Brewing.
That,
What's
is
up?
Slated to open up in the next few months here, so we're looking forward to talking to him
Near
about that.
future. Yep.
For those of you not from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Cowtown is kind of the nickname for Fort Worth, so
Yeah, and if you're not from Cowtown, just get here as soon as you can.
that's right. Come here, drink beer.
Mm-hmm.
We're fun.
And
So
stuff.
on
This is
the
on flyers.
survey, this kind of asked a wide variety of questions, everything from age and gender to facial hair to income and all that kind of thing. And like I said, there's a couple things that just stood out to me that I thought were interesting. So not surprising at all. When it comes to gender, 99% of all the people who responded are male.
Really don't
Yeah.
know who they are.
Are confused.
There's a very large
Oh.
transgender brewing population.
I misread that.
99%. Yeah.
I misread that. Sorry.
So the chances are, if you're a home brewer, you're white, you're male, and you're married. Pretty much is what that came down to. And the biggest age group, I thought that was interesting. The biggest age group was 30 to 39, and then it split pretty evenly also between just younger than that, 21 to 29, and just older than that, 40 to 49. I think the 40 to 49 is probably the coolest age group. if
You're
I had
right.
to- yeah.
About that.
Profession was an interesting one too. I could have guessed this one. Almost 17% of all homebrewers are engineers.
Yep.
And that doesn't
Or
surprise me
hookers.
at all. But
Pure
then,
science.
Same thing.
but actually, the most or the biggest demographic in that is computer science. It was 18%. So I would
They're
guess
computer
that.
engineers.
Yeah, computer engineer, just different type of engineer.
Right.
Yeah.
Software
Engineer that never
engineers.
actually builds anything.
That's right.
They build pretend things that we all stare at to look at surveys.
No, not even that. Really. Computer engineers just go into sales.
So annual income, I was surprised to see that the biggest category of annual income was $100,000 a year plus at
Right.
28%.
That's because they're engineers and computer science people.
Well, yeah, that's a
There
good
you
point.
go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, though, a lot of times on forums, and when you hear people talking about things and new items come out, you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, homebrewers are all DIYers, and you're never going to sell that expensive stuff." And yet here we
Shit.
go, we're
Not anymore.
selling grain fathers like they're going out of style.
That's right.
I think that's a real myth about home brewers that is the wanting to make everything themselves. I think people just did it out of necessity for a long time.
Right. Back in the
And,
day.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
The average home brewer actually has the money to spend to buy things rather than make them themselves.
Absolutely.
And I think we see
And they
that
choose
here.
to choose to make them themselves because they can often make better beer than they can buy.
So the next one here, we're going to get into where people start lying, and there's a couple of them in here where people lie. And so a religious perspective was the next one. I was very surprised to find out that more than half, 58%, were either atheist, agnostic, or just not religious at all. But even more surprised to find out that about 0.1%, 2 people said they were Mormon. So,
Well, that falls into the liar category too.
and,
there,
and
doesn't
one
it?
Muslim, yeah. So I think some people were just having fun here.
Doubling up.
Yeah. How long have you been homebrewing? I thought this was an interesting one. Most people have been homebrewing 1 to 3 years, almost 38%. So a lot of new people in there, and I think this kind of goes back to what we talk about a lot too, in that people are getting good at homebrewing a lot more quickly.
Right.
And so I think that's why I'm kind of surprised that it's that people are that new in general, because homebrew is better than it used to be in general.
Because
I
of
think.
organizations like Texas Brewing Inc.
That's right. That's right. So I fall into the 7 to 10 years, which was only 12%, and then 10 years plus was only 13.8%. So most people
Right
out there
above the
are
loser
6 years or
category.
below. Right above the loser category, right before the has-been category. Yeah. How do you learn to homebrew? I was very surprised to see that only 6% of people said podcasts. Only 164 people.
Right.
Yeah, I'm assuming 150, 155 of those are Come and Brew It listeners. I would think I figure we're probably dominating that entire market at this point, even though our podcast wasn't named like some other inferior ones.
I think they just didn't name ours because the other guys are sad and lonely, and they didn't want them to feel more sad and more lonely.
That could be. It could be.
It's a
We need
mercy
to just
thing.
make sure our listeners participate next year.
But online resources
yeah.
like forums were by far the largest at 56%. I was very surprised to find that books were still over 25%, at 27.6% from books.
A lot of people buy the classic styles, How to Brew, Brewing for Dummies
Same books.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah,
set,
they are.
Yeah.
And I hear that Playboy now has a brewing section in it. So
does it?
Yeah.
Man,
I just buy it for the brewing knowledge, honey.
Just the pictures of the brewing stuff. That's it.
absolutely. Look at all that
Well,
stainless
they don't even
steel.
have naked women anymore, do they? Or did they bring them back?
Oh, they brought them
They
back.
brought them back. I
Oh.
think that lasted
Yeah.
about 2 months.
Yeah. For the riots in the street.
Yeah, there was only 20,000 subscribers, and that went down to 5.
Down to 2.
Yeah. Another one I thought was interesting. What type of brewing do you do? 94% of people were all grain. I am very surprised at that number. I would have thought
Yeah.
a large percentage would be extract with.
It's
all-
just
Well,
too hard
and
to
I-
get good extract these
I would
days.
tell you,
know?
that I think that particular probably is skewed a little bit. And the
well,
reason
yeah,
being is
because that's just AHA members. Yeah,
the people that are
Yeah.
actually participating in something like this are probably a little more gung ho. They're probably a little more experienced.
Maybe
so,
a little bit more upper class too.
Yeah, maybe.
That's what I'm thinking.
they don't pack the can yet.
Maybe a little northeastern. Maybe a
not
little
the
more
kind of person.
northeastern than the average brewer. So that
Oh my God.
speaks for itself.
So, what type of all grain method do you use? I was very surprised that beer in a bag was number 2. Number 1 was batch sparging. Number 2 was brew in a bag, and number 3 was fly or continuous sparging. Brew in a bag has gotten to be a lot bigger than I think it ever was before. I think that goes to also there's some better equipment available for it. There's actually purpose-built bags for brewing instead of paint strainer bags like everybody's using
Yeah,
before.
Pella cases.
Fella.
I remember
Old socks.
back in the day using Pella cases for the grain and tube socks for the old hot bags. That's pretty rough times back then.
You can use some pantyhose.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, if you're not
Yeah.
embarrassed enough to buy them.
No, if you want to give up a pair, sure, but
I'm not even go there. I'm not drunk enough yet.
Yeah, probably. We'll circle back around to that one later on.
There'll be room for
That would
closet
be
and
that
wood
would be
chips.
a Adam Blackard quote.
Yes, yes. How do you typically package your home brew? 68% of people are using kegs with forced carbonation. I can't say I'm real surprised on that one because, like Stubby has said before, and I agree with him, I think if you're going to stay with brewing, you're going to end up kegging at some point because you just get tired of bottling.
Yeah, too much work.
I would think that the people that are bottling with and bottle conditioning, a lot of them, it might be a space issue more than anything, just not a place to put a kegerator, or the wife doesn't want it.
Well,
chest freezer
we're going to talk
sitting
about
there.
that tonight.
You don't want to get beat up again.
We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But one of the things that I always think is important, or at least I do, I like bottle conditioning the high gravity beers. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Why? But
when we have some high gravity beers.
Let's see here.
Okay,
Okay,
Speaking of which,
here's the big liar section. So, how much homebrew do you consume? So, the number one answer
Not
was,
very much.
was there are days where I drink no homebrew. So that was 57% of people. The second biggest answer was 12 to 24 ounces per day, 1 or 2 beers. That's probably more realistic. And you know what? I would believe that there are days where people don't drink any homebrew. But the next one is how much commercial beers do you drink? 79% of these liars said there are days where I drink no commercial beer.
Oh, whatever.
Well, just nobody has gotten to our status of drunkenness.
No,
Where,
I think that sometimes these guys are so hungover that there's like a Sunday that they don't have beer, and they're like, I didn't drink today. I think that's all it is. They're counting that hangover day.
79% of the day,
yeah.
I didn't have any.
Yeah.
Well, there's
So,
at least 3 days a week
let's
that I
see,
don't
what
drink.
else here?
I don't have time to open a bottle. It's just too packed.
Bullshit.
What do you
Excuse me.
use for brewing water? This is kind of a disturbing one. Most people use unfiltered tap water. 43% of people.
We need to change
And these
that.
are almost all grain brewers too. 94% of
Definitely
them.
need to change that.
Unfiltered tap water. And then the next one would be carbon filtered, which is what you should be at least doing that. That really surprised me that many people just open up the faucet and brew without even putting it through a charcoal filter. That's a really simple.
Or a tube
Thing
sock.
to do.
Some
Or
other kind of
tube sock,
filtration
right.
means, yeah.
A tube sock inside a piece of pantyhose inside a pillowcase.
Coffee filter
Right.
will definitely make a big difference.
Yeah, made a real big difference. And you just don't even know.
And let's see here. I think that might have been.
Honestly, what I was really surprised by was the other alcoholic beverages section.
Really?
Yeah, because it shows that if you're making something else, they're making cider, and then they're making mead, and then they're making wine.
Okay.
I'm just really surprised that it's cider so much, because real cider takes so much work, whereas the kits
They didn't
are so
say they were
easy.
making good cider.
It's very true.
They said they were pouring apple juice in a bucket and throwing some.
Yeah,
yeast
also
in it.
very true.
That is really popular out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it
more
sounds
popular
really
in other
popular. I just
states.
didn't expect it to be as popular as it was. The neck and neck on the wine and mead as well.
Then
So
there's
just
that
not,
old.
not everybody is deep in cider. I'm just
That's
saying.
right. Some people just kind of. They don't spend as much time in cider as the rest of us.
And some people don't like the Dickens brand of cider either.
So then the last one here, macro beer is evil bullshit and should be avoided at all costs. I don't remember answering that question in this survey. 41% agreed, 47% disagreed, 12% said they didn't know.
How do you not have an
I don't
opinion
know.
I don't.
about that?
Yeah. So at any rate, that's the results of the survey. If you took it, that's what it went to. I don't. It seems now like I wasted my time. I don't know.
It seems like we missed a lot of questions.
Well, some
10
people
minutes-
just
yeah.
don't
Well, I
have
didn't
an
want to hit
opinion.
on everything.
You know,
But-
so
Those are the most important ones. I
Right.
think.
So before we get into what we're talking about with high gravity brewing and that kind of thing, why don't we let Sean talk a bit about Cowtown Brewing and what's going on with that? And
Absolutely.
What can we
Yeah,
what we
maybe
can expect to see
and
from that?
make sure you get right up on the mic. You almost got to like eat it because otherwise you can't
if your
can't
beard,
hardly hear it.
if your
so.
beard isn't touching it, you're
but-
not speaking loudly enough.
that almost sounded like a pre-show discussion there.
Yeah, I know.
Stubmaster.
Sometimes we forget that stuff when you guys are yelling and screaming back and forth at each other.
What?
You know?
Didn't have a lot of time for.
I don't know. I can't call it.
But no, just kind of tell us a little bit about your background. You know, where you came from, how you got started brewing, and all that good stuff, and what you got coming to Fort Worth here.
Okay. So, Cowtown Brewing Company. We are going to be a brew pub on the northeast edge of downtown Fort Worth, right at the intersection of East Belknap and Northampton.
All right.
When you drop into downtown off 121 on Belknap,
Mhm.
that first light when you come over the bridge. So
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Very beautiful neighborhood.
yeah, it is.
You guys are going to get a lot of business from the courthouses. I'm just
It's
saying.
right across the street from the Sonic. You know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, we are going to feature, in addition to the beer, a barbecue menu.
Wow.
My partners and I own a barbecue restaurant in Mansfield, so we're going to take that concept and add the brewery to it. And
So you're going to have an actual brew pub?
yes,
Real
That is
deal.
fantastic.
It is about damn time.
that is the plan. So,
Yeah, because you guys already have a successful the restaurant where you're at's doing pretty well, and this is a nice add-on. You've got everything set up and lined up for that already.
correct,
So
yeah. So the restaurant in Mansfield is called Big D Barbecue. Just celebrated the 4th anniversary this month. So again, we're just going to build on that menu, and we're going to offer some slight differences in Fort Worth than we do in Mansfield. But obviously, the biggest difference is going to be the addition of the brewery.
right.
I have always thought that barbecue would be a perfect combination for a brew pub, and I've been
Goes
waiting
well
for
with
somebody
beer.
to open up an actual true brew pub too. That I'm very excited to hear about that, because so many people now they're opening up a brew pub, and it's kind of like food trucks and snacks and that kind of thing. But it's more of a way just to choose the right license that they need to be
Right,
able to
right.
to sell on
Sure.
site. In Southern California, where I'm from, when they say brew pub, it's a brew pub. It's a restaurant that also brews beer, and I always love those. So I'm excited to hear that we have a true brew pub coming to Fort Worth.
Yeah, we're excited to get this thing open. We've been working on this project for almost 3 years now, and I cannot wait to get the doors open. But
What kind of
I can't wait
system are you
either.
starting with?
so we're gonna have a 15-barrel Prospero brew house and 30-barrel fermenters to start with. We're gonna start with 3 fermenters and a 30-barrel bright tank, and then we're laying out a brewery floor to accommodate 6 more fermenters and 6 or 7 fermenters and 2 or 3 more bright tanks, depending on
Nice.
where we're at the time. We're probably going to go bigger the second round of fermenters, up from 30. But for now, we're going to be doing double batch brews on the brew house to fill up the tanks that we have. So,
What are you going to be filling them with?
good question. So, I'm still trying to kind of dial in where we're going to focus early on with kind of core brands. So, I brew a Pilsner, I brew a Kolsch. I've been messing around with an alt beer. I brew a Vienna Lager. I brew a Hellesbock, a Doppelbock.
It's a lot of loggers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
With 3 fermenters, we're gonna have to probably pick and choose the ones we focus on. Also brew a couple of different stouts, a milk stout and an imperial stout. We have 2 different double IPAs and a smash beer. That's kind of our
That's a very broad
palate.
selection.
Yeah. So I'm like most other craft beer drinkers. I like a lot of variety, and some times a year I want to drink certain types of beer, and other times I want to drink others, and that kind of is reflected in the beer that we brew, and I want to be able to offer that. So the core brands will be brewed on the big system. Just recently picked up a 1.5 barrel pilot system that will be really the heart of the tap room, where we brew a lot of one-off specialty beers and recipe development and things like that, and things that we don't ever intend, at least in the short term, to distribute outside of our walls. So it'll give people a chance to come in and experience things that they can't get at a bar or restaurant where we happen to be on tap. So
I like the inclusion of the Pilsner and the Kolsch in there too, which are 2 very approachable styles. Kolsch, I've always thought for a long time, could be a really big style in this country, and it's the kind of thing where you can go to your favorite local brewery or brew pub or whatever, and if you're bringing some people along with you that aren't big craft beer drinkers, there's something good for them too.
Good point.
I like that a lot, because it makes it so much easier to go and be social, especially with the restaurant aspect of it. You're going there to eat too.
right.
Yeah, they
So-
both go well with barbecue as well.
Yeah, yeah. So
I don't
that's
know
a
anything
stout
that doesn't
lineup.
go well with barbecue, but
That's true.
yeah.
Nothing doesn't go well. With
I don't
barbecue.
know. I don't know. I want to drink sour beers with barbecue.
Sour beers
We
will
actually-
go well with barbecue.
It depends on the
Everything
sauce, really.
goes well with barbecue.
We usually have, every once in a while we'll have a sour on tap down at the restaurant in Mansfield, and it usually sells out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
so.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Told you.
Well, good stuff. I can't wait for that. You said you're at least a few months off from opening still. So
Yeah, so we've had some fun with the city this year. And it's not just city. Part of it's our fault too. We're going back and forth with our architects and our engineers on the plans for the remodel, and we've gone through several revisions on those plans. And the city has asked us to change some things, and so it's set us back a little bit further than we had anticipated. We were hoping to be open to the public by the end of this year. I'm pretty confident we'll be brewing beer before the end of this year, but we probably will not be opening our doors until very early next year, into January, 1st of February.
Well, sometimes beer needs a little bit to age.
That's
so,
true.
You know.
From a brewing perspective, I'm not complaining about that too much because, again,
Yeah,
with the lager lineup, it gives me some time to, stock up some inventory and be ready to go. But, I'm still anxious to have those doors open and have.
I'm really excited to hear about the lager selection that you're going to have. That's
me too.
That's really refreshing to know that folks kind of have that in mind, and people who can do it and bring it are doing that.
And you'll be able to fill growlers too, right?
Correct. We are zoned for both growler sales and packaged beer.
That's excellent.
So
You're gonna see me a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think everybody at the table here is going to be in.
yeah, we're gonna be in there a lot too.
Tell us about the food lineup.
Same.
What do you
Yeah.
kind of specialize in for barbecue?
It's traditional Texas barbecue. Brisket, pork ribs,
Armadillo.
chicken, roadkill.
Okay.
Whatever we can.
You are
No.
doing
whatever we can
chicken.
scrounge up. Yeah, chicken. Yes.
Okay, good.
We said chicken.
And then certain times of year, like around the holidays, we'll do turkeys and whole hams and that
Gonna
sort of thing.
have like a
special order.
pre-order kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Very nice.
All right.
So
I'm gonna put my name in the hat there first year for a turkey.
perfect.
All right.
We're still kind of chewing on what the menu's going to look like in Fort Worth. I'm pretty confident that like the lunch menu will be more of a traditional barbecue menu like we have in Mansfield. I think the dinner happy hour dinner menu will be a little bit more eclectic. Still using smoked meats as the foundation, but with a little bit more creativity. Some shareable plates, some bite size. Barbecue tapas, if you will.
Nice.
Something
Maybe
a little
some street tacos with some goat cheese kind of stuff.
potentially, yeah.
That would be badass.
so
I'm just
Goat
saying.
tacos
more
with some
big
street
city
cheese.
Goat
Texas.
tacos and street cheese. I don't know about
So really, nothing's off the table at this point. We want to develop something that's kind of fun and unique. And if you're coming to our place on a Thursday night and you're going to have 3 or 4 beers and have a big barbecue dinner, you're going to be in a coma by the time you leave. So we want to be able to have something a little lighter that goes well with the beer. But still kind of satisfies the appetite and doesn't put you in a position where you feel like you're walking out the door with a
Rolled out the
Fred
door.
Flintstone brontosaurus bone in your to-go bag. So.
On the same note as the approachable beers, my wife's not a big barbecue fan. I love barbecue, but my wife's
We
not
still
a big,
like
so
her, too.
Yeah, I still keep her around. But, so having something a little bit different from a standard barbecue menu will be good too. That she can.
Yeah, you only
eat
need
whatever,
one
I don't
thing
know, while
to
I'm
keep,
having fun.
keep those people like that happy. It's like Trisha's. My wife's like that too. So one good plate, one good plate of something, and then you get all the beer and barbecue you want. So
Right.
Hell yeah.
All right, well, good stuff. I'm looking forward to it, and we'll keep the listeners posted as we hear more about that. Heck, it might even be open by the time this podcast is released. Actually, so.
possibly.
I don't know. We're going things pretty fast now, so.
Well, Sean, you are planning on releasing beer before you actually have the tap room. Maybe you have some stuff around town. Maybe before you actually
Like
open
to
up.
bring here to
that's
Texas
definitely
Brewing.
what I'm hoping for. Right.
Right.
We've got to get the brew house set up and operational. But assuming that we're ready to go by the time that I think we're going to be, it's entirely possible we'll have some beer out in the market
Nice.
before we open the doors. So
Good stuff.
Well, and I'm just saying, I've had a lot of his beers. Make sure to pick some up, especially that Vienna lager. I drank quite a few of them one night.
What are they called if we are looking for them? Any of the ones that are out there?
Well, we're still working on the names for the particular beers, but yeah, we'll be releasing some of that soon. So.
Okay.
All right, well, good stuff. So let's move into our discussion on brewing tonight. We're tying the actual brewing discussion into the beers that we're going to talk about later. What made me want to talk about this was Jamie Fulton from Community Brewing here in Dallas come in and given a talk to us at a brewing club meeting several years ago that had to do with mash schedules and brewing for high gravity beers, and he's specifically talking about quads. And it's really changed the way I brew. I use several of the techniques he talked about, especially when you're talking about a beer like a quad. And I think one of the things that's particular to these Belgian styles with the high alcohol is that all of them are going to be lighter bodied for the amount of alcohol that's in them. Even a quad, which I think maybe has a reputation as being a little bit more of a heavy beer. If you drink some of the classic examples of it, there's still a lighter bodied beer for being 10 and 12% and that kind of thing. Higher carbonation, they have a drier feel to them. There's not a real perception of being dry because the esters from the yeast and because the high alcohol and some of the more bold flavors in it kind of mask that. But in reality, in order to brew these correctly, you do need to dry them out. If you don't mash correctly and you end up with a beer that ends up at 1020, 1025, something like that.
Yuck.
Right, yeah. It's not going to be a very good quad. It's just going to be syrupy and sweet, and it's not going to drink right. And so that was one of the things that Jamie talked about, and so a couple of things that he taught us at that meeting, I've applied towards some of my high gravity beers, and it really works well. And one of them is the mash schedule. So, we've talked a lot about drying beers out, especially recently when we were talking about saisons and mash schedules with Matt. Matt was talking about mashing it in 145 to 148 range for 90 minutes and that kind of thing. What Jamie had taught us on that was actually a step mash, and this is enough of a small step that you can actually do this, I think, even if you're brewing in a cooler where you're just having to add some hot water to it, as opposed to if you've got a Herms or a Rim setup or something where you can change your mash temp, or a Grainfather or whatever it is. I've tried step mashes before in coolers, and they're very difficult to do correctly if you have to change the temperature drastically. So like if you're talking about doing a protein rest in a cooler, you're not going to do that very well, where you're taking your beer from 113 degree protein rest up to like 150 degree saccharification rest. You just have to add too much hot water to it to do it, and you end up thinning your mash nut too much, and you don't hit your temperature right, and it doesn't work. But what he was talking about is more along the lines of doing your initial mash in the 145 to 148 range, so a very low mash temperature where you're really going to get fermentable wort. But then in the last 10 to 15 minutes of it, to step that up to 155. So you're talking about maybe a 10-degree increase. And basically what that does is it gelatinizes the remaining starches that are in the grain. So and that just makes them available for the enzymes to break them down. And so you're only in that temperature range for a 10 to 15-minute period. So you still have some of your beta amylase, your enzymes that create the more fermentable work. They're still working. They haven't been denatured yet, but you've also made the starches available to those enzymes, and it gets every last little bit and helps dry it out. And I've used this on saisons, and I did a lot of high gravity brewing for many years. It was kind of everything I did was 8% or above, and I think that technique works.
That's how
really,
I started
really well.
out, and I've kind of stayed to it.
Yeah, well, if
everything I brew is high gravity.
If you don't get to brew very often, like
Just
that
saying.
was what I did when I didn't get to brew often. Was I did it high gravity because it lasted me longer.
I keep trying to brew lower gravity beers, but I can't get anything at below 6.5%.
Well, it's pretty easy. You just don't.
No,
You just you put less grain.
that doesn't sound right.
Well, speaking to that mash schedule that you were talking about, a lot of times that has worked well for me in the past, and is just coming in at a low temperature, mashing in at really relatively low temperature, and just do a slow ramp up over maybe an hour and a half, all the way up to mash out. And so you hit a lot of those starches along the way. You have to be careful though not to go too slow, because if you don't, what happens is you already use up all your enzymes, use up all the sugar already. So,
well, and you have to
really
make sure
careful
you don't go too fast too. That's you have to time that pretty well.
And I think it's kind of tough actually. I mean, I was really successful with doing that on the grain father. It was relatively easy, to just ramp it up through all the way through. And I mean, that thing isn't like it's not super hot by any means. So I mean, it took probably a good hour, and I went all the way through. From start to mash out, and it worked well for. I did that on a triple and a quad, and it worked great. So.
And this is one of those things where when you're talking about what type of system you want to design or what might be right for you, you're looking at a grain father, or do you want to do a Herm system, or you just want to keep using a cooler or something like that. There are some beers that really do benefit from being able to step mash. And
this would be one of them.
Yeah, I would say if you're brewing with wheat or rye a lot and you're able to do a protein rest or beta glucan rest, that makes a huge difference with those. But this is
as well as a mash out too.
Yeah, and as well as a mash out, I agree. Now mash out's a little bit easier to do with a cooler because it doesn't matter if you thin it out too much for a mash out. You can put as much water as you want for the mash out. But for your steps where you're actually, converting sugars or proteins or anything like that, you need to be careful about it. So this is one of those things where I think you got to take that into consideration when you're deciding what kind of system will work best for you. And I think it's one of the things that the grain father really has a leg up.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about that, and I'm really not trying to pump the grain father up. But one of the things I would say is that if I'm going to do a Herm system or something like that can to accomplish the same thing, I'm probably going to spend a hell of a lot more money. Now, I'll be able to do a bigger probably volume, but if by the time you get a couple pumps and you get a couple kettles and then you get a Herms coil and all of that, it's relatively inexpensive, especially if you're going to start getting in all the brew pie and all that other stuff. So,
and it's more difficult too. There is a lot more finesse and technique to step mashing in a Herm system than there is on a grain father.
Yeah, and you've heard me talk about it a million times, is that, before I had an actual Herm system, I had a 5-gallon corny keg with a temperature controller on it, and I had the Herms coil inside that corny keg, and I was able to keep my temperatures a lot more steady than I am with. I have a Herms now with the big 15-gallon kettle inside there, and one of the things I noticed right away is that my temperatures would swing a lot more in that, because you got 15 gallons of water you're heating up rather than 5 gallons.
Right.
So it made a huge difference. And that little 220 hot water heater element, man, it'd book it with 5 gallons. You know? So the other benefit though too to that is let's say you get your Herms water too hot. Well, the problem is that you got to cool it off, and then you either have to add cold water to it. I mean, it's really not very precise, so it takes a lot longer for that 15 gallons worth of water to cool down than that 5 does. So it just really works well. So that's something to consider when you're doing that stuff too. So just a word.
But this is the type of thing, if you're gonna get serious about brewing some of these high gravity Belgian beers, I think you to differentiate between a very good one and a great one, I think you need to be able to do some of these step mashes and have some of this kind of control to really dry it out. Maybe you don't have to, but it makes it much more easy to accomplish when you can design your mash schedule.
And don't forget the fact that when you talk about all that, the vessel itself needs to be able to hold the amounts of grain it takes to do some of these larger beers.
Right,
so,
yeah, that's a good point.
You got a poundage change there. It's quite a bit compared to your standard old whatever pale ale or something.
Well, and I have had a lot of luck with adding DME to help too, because James Harrington and I would do a quad once a year, and doing a 10-gallon quad, I just couldn't fit that. I can fit about 37 pounds of grain in my mash tun, and that's just not enough for what we were doing. And so we would add some DME in that. So then it's even more important to make sure that you mash low, because the DME is going to be more like a mid-range mash schedule. So what you are mashing, you need to make sure you really, really get fermentable.
Exactly.
So that I think that's a really important part with all these high gravity beers, and I've applied it to other things too. If you're going to do imperial stouts or anything like that, you've got to make sure that you mash correctly. You can't mash a 12% stout the same way you mash a 6% stout. It won't come out right. It'll be syrupy and terrible, and it's really tough to I don't know if it's even possible to fix a beer once it's like that.
Just throw some bread on it.
Yeah, and then wait for a year. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that's actually what I did with one of these quads that James and I did. Mine, it came out at like 1025, and nothing I could do about it. And I think we had some problems with the mash where we couldn't get the temperature just right.
Oh, okay.
And so I threw bread on it and left it for a year. And
How
it was
did-
really good at
turned
the
out
end of a
good?
year, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
took a year to do it. So.
Yeah.
And that's one of the cool things too. I think about the quad, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into it. I think the quad is a lot like the stout in that it's a good base beer to play around with too. You can do some other stuff to quad.
Yeah, they accept
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
additions well.
We'll talk about that more when we get into actually.
And quad
tasting
and
them.
dark strong are interchangeable pretty
Right.
much. So
I just like quad because it's one word, and I don't like
Right.
to say two words if I can say one word. So.
there you go.
And I just
Lazy
took like 20 words,
asshole.
20 words to talk about how I don't like to say words.
Can I ask a
Stupid
dumb
words.
newbie question?
Yes.
No.
Damn it.
Go ahead.
If you're doing a dark strong versus another high gravity brew, is it more about what you're putting into it to make it a Belgian dark strong / a quad, or is it more what yeast you're using in order to get that high gravity brew?
Personally, I think it's both.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
I
the,
think
yeah.
they're equally important.
The recipe is going to affect the flavor range of what you're starting with, and then the yeast is going to finish it.
Mhm.
You know? But it's still going to be whatever volume of base grain to get usually up to the gravity that you're talking about, and then whatever you're adding on there to apply the flavors. So
Okay.
And I wish we had some of Stubby's quad that he had done recently that was just Pilsner malt and dark candy sugar, because that was one of the best quads I've ever tasted, I thought. And I thought it kind of spoke to, I think people over-engineer recipes on quads. They put too much different stuff in them where, because of the complexity of the yeast character and because you're already dealing with some bolder flavors, you don't need to overdo it. I've had so many quads that people pour way too much Special B into them, and I think it just ruins them. They taste like raisins. They're trying to
Dirty raisins.
yeah, dirty raisins. they're trying to imitate
raisins.
an old oxidized quad that they had, and their beer tastes like that when they first brew it, and I don't think that's very good.
Well, and you probably heard me say this a million times, and I see you guys come in, a lot in the shop, and it's insane. Some of these guys will put 12 different malts in one beer, and I think what you get when you do that is you get just a muddy mess. I mean, you can't really discern all the different flavors that you're getting from all of these different malts. And the reason I did this is it was actually, I think, a recipe in Drew and Denny's book, and supposedly that's what West Lutheran does. So, the most I guess
the best beer in the world.
Well, I don't know if it's the best beer in the world, but
Most
it is
interesting beer in the
it's
world.
probably one of the rarest beers in the world. So, but anyway, so supposedly all they use is dark candy sugar and no specialty grains at all.
Shut
So,
up. Come on.
yeah. So what I did is I used the D180 dark candy syrup and 100% Pilsner, and man, I was blown away because when I
Couple
drank
chiclets.
it.
Your D did a 180.
Well, so anyways, it's
Don't
dark,
get the
it's
visual.
dark-
Don't
That's
get the
a dumb
visual.
joke right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's really dark candy sugar, right? And what was surprising to me is those flavors that I was getting from this. I always thought, oh well, that's where Special B comes into play. But really, you can get all of those different flavors and all those amazing things from that dark candy syrup.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So I think recipes are generally over-engineered on this. Kind of like when you see homebrewers bring in for some stouts and that kind of thing too, where they're throwing, like he said, 5, 6, 7 different types of dark roasted grains in there. I think keep your recipe simple on this. Let the yeast do the heavy lifting. Make sure that you're designing it so you can dry it out real nice.
Yeah.
And then
And if you hang out with a lot of pro brewers, they go, "Oh, it's base malt, and then we're going to throw a sack of this in and a sack of that in."
right.
They're not going in and weighing out 10 pounds
Ounces.
of grain
Right.
for this and 10 pounds of that. They're I would say that's probably more common than not. The other, and it's probably more the exception than the rule.
Right.
Right.
So the other thing, I guess, then would be yeast health and pitching amount. Another misnomer I think about these beer, or myth I guess would be a better term, is that you can just throw Belgian yeast in and not even worry about it, and it turns out a great Belgian beer, that you can stress the yeast out and that you can underpitch and all these kind of things, and you're going to be in big trouble if you try and make a quad and don't pay real close attention to your yeast.
Ducks.
Was there
Damn
a
it.
duck in here?
Rabbit
step on a
season.
duck?
It's rabbit
From the
season.
Chinese food
Rabbit
restaurant.
Then the
season.
bartender says, "That's not a duck."
Rabbit season.
No, but
Right.
oxygenation and pitch rate is very, very
Yeah.
important on these. Pitch rate in particular, you've got to put a ton of yeast into it. The nice thing about Belgian yeast is it will create the flavors you're looking for at a low temperature with the correct pitch rates and all that stuff. You can do this like you do normally, not like with some Hefeweizens where you're trying to underpitch and stress the yeast a little bit and that kind of thing. You still need to keep the temperatures low on these, so you're not getting hot fusel alcohols, because you're dealing with a 10 to 12% alcohol beer, and you need to make sure that it's not hot.
Good
because
point. Yeah.
Once that's in there, you're gonna have a really hard time.
You gotta treat
aging
it
it
gentle
out.
and love it.
Yeah, actually, and
For it to come out good.
Pete, you and Greg brewed an award-winning quad not that long ago, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, the Belgian dark that we have.
Mhm.
It's pretty tasty.
Belgian Dark Strong.
Didn't you win something with that?
Golden
What was
Raven.
that one? That was the first, wasn't it?
I don't remember. It's been so long.
Oh, you remember?
Slips and stuff.
You remembered
Well,
it.
that's
Look,
that
some of
one.
these
We
guys-
actually use golden raisins in there.
Yep.
You know, that's a great beer, and it aged really well.
Oh, it ages.
If you watch the
fantastically.
Clyde's and Dale's Christmas video,
Oh,
you'll
that's
see,
right. Yeah.
you'll see the last of it being sort of poured into Pete's mouth right from the keg. So
That's the approved
While he's in
Belgian
bed.
drinking
well,
method.
that's the Clyde, that's the Clydesdale of Clyde's favorite beer, right there. You know.
What?
it was good.
The Clydesdale favorite beer?
You know,
Huh?
Is that how they get them that strong?
it is.
Now, I would recommend on your temperatures, though, for your fermentation, to start low and to ramp up and let these kind of get warm at the end to keep the yeast going and finish it out and dry it out. By the time you're getting into that high alcohol percentage, it's tough on the yeast. They're stressed out. You don't want them to drop out before they're done doing what they're doing. So
Yeah.
I will generally start a beer like this in the mid 60s, 65, 66-ish, and end up somewhere in the low 70s, like 72, 73, something
Right.
like
I
that.
typically start out 62, 63, and then just kind of gradually raise it up towards the end.
Mhm.
I've found
have to-
that if you treat them gentle, you know, on the first 2 or 3 days, it typically does a lot better in
Yeah,
the
it's,
end.
the first 2-3 days are the crucial part.
So
yeah.
just again, just love it. Make it, make the yeast comfortable. Don't stress them out. Ramp them up slow, but give them plenty of time to finish out too.
I
You
thought
know.
you were about to say
at a higher-
makes sweet
higher
love to
temp.
it.
Well, you can do that, but
Put on some Barry White.
It introduces
Yeah.
some very different
Meow,
bacteria.
meow.
some Lou Rawls. Hey, baby. Anyway,
Get him in
But
the mood.
hey, I tell you what, let's take a quick break, and let's come back and we'll talk a little more about it. I think there's lots of different techniques that we talk about when brewing these beers: yeast starters, oxygenation, all of those different things. What do you
We
think?
can also drink some beers, right?
I
we
think
have a
I
couple
think
to
we've
drink,
got
right?
some. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
All
think
right.
we do.
Just
so.
a few things.
But anyway, we'll be right back.
All right.